Indonesia and Malaysia are neighboring Southeast Asian countries. Although allied diplomacy is used between them, both have a history of very dynamic diplomatic relations. There are many agreements between the two countries, but there are also many conflicts of interest between the two. Indonesia and Malaysia have diplomatic relations and work closely together. Examples of security cooperation between Indonesia and Malaysia include collaboration to crush communist gangs in East Malaysia and joint military exercises. Indonesia and Malaysia established diplomatic relations when Indonesia was one of the first countries to recognize Malaysia's independence. The relationship between Indonesia and Malaysia has had its ups and downs. They are often referred to as cognate countries because they are neighbors. This time, we'll talk about how these two countries will look in 2050. Indonesia's population will be 332 million people, with a population growth rate of 0.21% in Indonesia. Malaysia will have a population of 42.5 million people in the meantime. Malaysia's population is growing at a 0.27% annual rate. This time, Indonesia outperforms in terms of overcoming its population growth rate. Indonesia will have a population density of 178 people per square kilometer. Meanwhile, Malaysia will have a population density of 129 people per square kilometer. Indonesia will have a country area of 1,916,862 square kilometers per square kilometer, 37 provinces, and 94 cities. Meanwhile, Malaysia's country area will be 330,345 square kilometers, and there will still be 13 states. In 2022, the average age in Indonesia will be 29.7 years. By 2050, the average age will have risen to 37.4 years. Meanwhile, Malaysia's average age in 2022 will be 29.6 years. In 2050, the average age in Malaysia will be 40.5 years. Indonesia has three major cities, the largest of which is Jakarta, which has a population of 35.5 million people. Surabaya is a city in Indonesia with a population of 9.1 million people, as well as Bandung, which has a population of 8.6 million people in the year 2050. Meanwhile, the three most populous cities in Malaysia are viz. Kuala Lumpur is home to 11.2 million people, Johor Bahru is a state in Malaysia with a population of 1.62 million people. Ipoh has a population of 1.34 million. Gross domestic product (GDP) is defined as the total value of all goods and services produced in a given area over a given time period, which is usually a year. The gross domestic product of Indonesia is $7.02 trillion USD. Malaysia, on the other hand, has a GDP of $1.24 trillion, product of $1.24 trillion. GDP PPP, or gross domestic product based on purchasing power parity, is a method for calculating an alternative exchange rate between two countries' currencies. GDP measures how much a currency can buy in international terms, usually dollars, because the prices of goods, products, and services vary by country. In 2050, Indonesia's GDP will be $10.51 trillion based on purchasing power parity. Malaysia's GDP based on purchasing power parity, or PPP GDP, will be $2.81 trillion in 2050. The literacy rate is determined by the percentage of a specific age group's population who can read and write. The adult literacy rate is for people aged 15 and up, the youth literacy rate is for people aged 15 to 24, and the adult literacy rate is for people aged 65 and up. In 2050, Indonesia will have a literacy rate of 98.5%. Malaysia, on the other hand, has a literacy rate of 97%, 1.5% less than Indonesia. The poverty level is the percentage of the population living below the poverty line, which is the bare minimum for a country's standard of living. Poverty has many different causes in different countries. Indeed, the issue of poverty, such as the availability of basic necessities and others, In 2050, the poverty rate in Indonesia will be 0.37%. Malaysia, on the other hand, has a poverty rate of 0.66%. Indonesia outperforms the global poverty rate by 0.29%. The percentage of a country's population that practices a particular religion is referred to as the majority religion. In 2050, Indonesia will have 3 religions as the majority, namely Islam 85.6%, the largest Islamic country in the world. Christians outnumber non-Christians by 11.1%. Hinduism has 1.88% religious adherents. Meanwhile, Malaysia has 3 major religions. Islam is the majority religion 72.4%. Buddhism has 10.8% of religious adherents. Christians account for 9.4% of religious adherents. A billionaire is someone who has a net worth of at least $1 billion in a specific currency, usually a major currency like the US dollar, euro, or pound sterling. Indonesia will have 680 billionaires by 2050. Meanwhile, Malaysia will have 90 billionaires by 2050. 12th. Military might. Military defense is the main force of national defense that is built and ready to face military threats, and it is made up of main components, reserve components, and supporting components. In 2050, Indonesia plans to have 1.2 million military personnel. In 2050, Malaysia will be a military power. Unemployment is a problem that both developed and developing countries face. How should one deal with unemployment? Unemployment is actually natural because workers must lose or leave their jobs every day. However, if a country's unemployment rate is high, it will be a problem. The reason for this is that the country's labor absorption is not optimal because the number of available jobs exceeds the number of workers. In 2050, Indonesia will have a 24% unemployment rate. Meanwhile, Malaysia has a 25% unemployment rate, which is 1% higher than in Indonesia. A forest is an area with many plants, such as trees, ferns, grass, shrubs, mushrooms, and so on. Forests perform vital functions such as carbon dioxide storage, carbon dioxide sinks, animal habitat, hydrologic current modulation, and soil conservation. In 2050, Indonesia's forest area will account for 38% of its total land area. Meanwhile, Malaysia will have 52% of its total land area covered by forest by 2050. Infrastructure refers to all of the facilities that the general public requires to support various community activities in their daily lives. Infrastructure supports the activities of the general public, where infrastructure functions to facilitate and support the smooth operation of the community's social and economic activities, such as the distribution of goods and services. Indonesia will complete its high-speed train project in 2020 for bullet train. In the same year, Indonesia will complete the new Santara City project, which will relocate the country's capital. Indonesia will complete its land transportation project in 2035, namely Hyperloop. In Malaysia, in 2026, it will complete a mega project on development layout with a clean city concept, namely Forest City. Malaysia will complete the tower construction project in 2023, namely Merdeka 118. And certainly not inferior to Indonesia, Malaysia will finish its land transportation project, namely Hyperloop. The Human Development Index (HDI) compares life expectancy, literacy, education, and living standards across countries. The HDI explains how people can gain access to development outcomes such as income, health, and education. In 2050, Indonesia has a percentage HDI level of 0.872. Malaysia, on the other hand, has a percentage HDI level of 0.915 in 2050. Life expectancy is an estimate of the average age of a country's residents. The level of welfare in a country influences life expectancy. In 2050, the average life expectancy in Indonesia will be 81 years. Malaysia, on the other hand, has a life expectancy of 82 years in 2050.